It began on a windless night when the city felt hushed, like the world had pressed a finger to its own lips. Thin walls kept their promises badly. They carried a voice across plaster and paint, a warm ache threaded with something that sounded like rain held back by a stubborn sky. And not words at first, just cadence, the low rise and fall of breath shaped into melody, a hum, a half song, a confession no one meant to overhear and no one could forget once it entered the bloodstream. At first it felt like stumbling upon a lighthouse in fog. The notes drifted through the quiet and settled in the chest, right where nameless restlessness makes a home. There was loneliness in that voice, yes, but not the kind that pushes people away. It was the human kind, soft-edged, searching, magnetic. Every tone held warmth like a hand offered without ceremony. Every pause dared the darkness to argue. Listening became a reflex, a way of keeping time. Sleep would wait until the voice slid into silence, and even then, the quiet felt full of it, like a fragrance that clings to the air long after the wearer disappears. Words arrived later, broken phrases, the kind someone speaks when the room is otherwise empty and the hour has turned tender. It wasn't dramatic, just a voice asking the night if it might hold something steady for once. A name whispered like a bruise, a laugh that tried to be light and failed. The scrape of a chair, a sink's sigh, footsteps that leaned into the floorboards as though apologizing. That was the first real surprise, the apology hidden in the rhythm of moving. It said more than the fragments, and more honestly. It said, trying. It said, not fine, but still here. There was a moment when the impulse to answer rose like heat in a quiet room. Something simple, a clear of the throat, a small cough, a soft knock against the shared wall to say another living heart is right here, close enough to touch if the building knew how to breathe, but the moment folded itself away. The voice deserved its own space. Listening felt like prayer, and prayers are not interrupted. So the night kept moving, and the city exhaled, and the sound kept returning, night after night, until the voice felt less like a stranger and more like the hallway's true address. It changed the air between things. The hallway light seemed warmer. The elevator's clatter felt less mechanical and more like accompaniment. Even the ordinary objects inside the room, the chipped mug, the leaning plant, the hair tie looped around a doorknob, took on a backstage glow, as if they knew they were part of a story now, something being tuned carefully before it played out loud. The body learned the voice's patterns the way a bird learns the wind, what notes meant sadness, what notes meant tired hope, what notes meant needing softness just to make it through the next hour. The mind began keeping a secret list of questions for a person not yet met. Favorite song, morning tea or coffee, what childhood smelled like in summer, whether silence ever frightened or only comforted. One night the song stopped too fast, not faded, cut as if a door had been closed or a call disconnected. The sudden quiet felt rude. It pressed in, an absence with elbows. Instinct reached for the wall, two knuckles tapping a rhythm more heart than Morse. 3 taps, like a heartbeat that wanted to be braver than it felt. Another answering tap, hesitant, lifted from the other side, not a mirror of the pattern, more like a reply that said, heard. The flush of blood that followed felt like standing in warm rain after a long drought. 3 taps again, then 2, then a gentle slide of palm against plaster. Low without words, comfort without permission. The wall trembled just barely, as if sharing a shiver. The days that followed rearranged themselves around the possibility of that sound. Mornings arrived with a tug of might, there be humming in the shower next door. Afternoons carried the hum under mundane errands. Evenings unfurled like records slipped from paper sleeves, the needle lowered in anticipation. The voice began reading out loud sometimes, snippets from something worn and loved, a poem or a dog-eared page. It turned out the voice smiled when it read, certain syllables brightened, certain endings lifted as if they believed in dawn. The walls didn't hide the smile, They wore it like sunlight across a floor. Courage enters quietly, same as sorrow. It arrived in the shape of a note tucked under a door, a half blush of paper with a sentence in neat handwriting. The walls carry music well. No name. No apartment number, just that. A small offering on an ordinary Monday, and yet the hallway felt transformed into a chapel where even the floorboards knew to be kind. The reply came the next night, slid back under the door in a careful hand that looked like someone trying to be tidy for a test they wanted to pass. Music goes where it's needed. Then a line from a song that had echoed through many late hours, 5 words like a secret handshake. The response, not an hour later, a single pressed violet, fragile as breath, with a tiny smudge of thumbprint near the stem. What grows between strangers when sound becomes bridge is not instant. It's made of patience and intimacy paced like breathing. Voices through a wall became voices on either side of a doorway, left ajar while taking out trash at the same time by accident. Became laughter caught in the act of escaping. Became a shared elevator ride made brighter by an unremarkable weather complaint that turned remarkable because it was shared. Details began to anchor themselves. Hands that looked like they knew how to fix small things. A tired jacket with a stubborn zipper. A scar at the jawline shaped like a crescent. And eyes that carried a whole ocean's weather, storm, gray some nights, morning, clear other nights, always honest. There were longer talks, seated on the hallway floor with backs to the same wall, both sides of the boundary now holding the conversation up together. Stories unfolded in low voices. The teacher who believed in brilliance before the report card did, the old apartment with the leaky window, the song that saved a winter, the fear that arrived at 23 and hasn't entirely left. No grand gestures, just the steady exchange of human-sized truths. The closeness took root not through declarations, but through the way silence felt after speaking. Easier, safer, less cold. When touch finally crossed the small distance, it wasn't firework, drunk or rushed. It was a hand offered to help lift a grocery bag that had split its paper belly. An accidental brush of fingers over apples escaping to the floor. That slow freeze where the body realizes it has found a familiar temperature in someone else's skin. The gravity in that tiny contact surprised everything. How quickly warmth moved up the arm, how the heart beat a glass against the ribs like a toast. That night, the voice didn't sing. It didn't need to. It just spoke the name of the person standing there, and the name sounded brand new, like a word returning to itself after being loaned to a long silence. Love did not knock with fanfare. It slipped in like breath, a presence that turned the simplest things into music. Washing dishes in adjacent kitchens became a duet, clinks and water and soft humming braided together. Windows opened at the same hour taught the night how to move sweetly between rooms. Language discovered a softness it had been missing. Words practiced tenderness until they sounded fluent. The body learned a new map. The corridor where first courage lived, the stairwell where laughter began, the patch of faded carpet where confessions came easier, the doorway that remembered first brave hello. Pain didn't vanish. No story worth keeping demands amnesia. Some nights the voice roughened with old grief, the kind with long legs that wander back uninvited. Those nights asked for gentler music, hands wrapped around the same mug, blanket shared, listening offered like a quiet harbor. Not fixing, not rescuing, just steady presence. The walls, once barriers, seemed to hold the space with them, patient and gracious. Healing did its slow, unphotogenic work, and desire learned to live beside it, warm and careful, more candle than wildfire, more constellations than spotlight. What began as eavesdropping turned into belonging. The world outside could still be loud, indifferent, carnivorous, but inside this small orbit, every ordinary act carried chapel. Light, keys sliding home in a lock because someone was waiting, a toothbrush making room beside another, a record left out because the favorite track might be needed before sleep. The voice that first arrived like a rumor of rain had become weather, seasons, patterns, storms that taught how to hold on, sunlight that taught how to let go, a climate the heart learned to trust. There is a point in love when words stop reaching and still aren't enough, when standing in a doorway with a hand on a familiar jaw says more than 100 poems. That point came quietly, too, as most good things do. The city went on clattering its bright loneliness, but here, in the faithful geography of thin walls and soft nights, something truer had been built. Not a fortress, not a stage, just a life rearranged around a sound that knew how to find its echo. And it all began with a voice that turned a stranger into home. The first language learned together wasn't made of words. It began in the lit space between a half-open door and a passing step, where a smile could bloom shy and quick and still feel like a vow. There was that delicate choreography of timing, keys turning, a bag shifting on a shoulder, the soft pause of recognizing a face that had already begun to mean something. The body knew before the mouth did, breath steadied, then skipped, then steadied again, all in the span of a look that lasted one beat longer than strangers owe each other. The hallway, with its indifferent lighting and stubborn scuffs, gathered a quiet radiance each time those eyes appeared, like a mundane place learning how to keep a sacred secret. Messages found their way into the day the way small birds find gaps in a fence. A receipt folded into a square with a sentence on the back. A napkin left on the railing with a doodle that looked like a constellation and somehow like a map home. Even a cup of sugar measured into a jar borrowed across the threshold spoke clearly. The hour is busy, the world is loud, but there is a soft place made here. None of it was grand. A scribbled note made room for tenderness. An emoji tucked at the end of a text held the weight of a promise. The smallest gestures learned to carry a future. Eyes did the heavy lifting. Across the lobby, through the elevator's sleepy mirrors, over the tops of grocery bags and the rustle of mail, they learned to say paragraphs. Today was too big, but this moment is small enough to hold. There's more to tell, but the telling can wait while the listening begins. Stay a second longer. And when the day had frayed every nerve, that gaze turned into a hand pressed gently at the small of the back without moving an inch, steadying, claiming, kind. The body softened under it. Shoulders forgot old armor. Even the mouth, trained for politeness and weather, stumbled into honesty just from being seen like that. The ritual of almost, meeting became the music of the week. Leave at 7:50, catch the elevator at 7:52. Share a silence that felt like the warmest blanket. No need to perform, no urge to fill. The floor numbers blinked their steady count and something inside answered, this is the right direction. Once, a laugh escaped too suddenly, startled out of a quiet throat by a silly remark about the elevator's groan. Laughter, it turned out, was another fluent tongue. It bubbled and folded in the chest, turned ordinary time into something that felt like a first day and a last chance at once. After that, laughter showed up more easily, the way a shy cat returns when it decides the porch is safe. Fingertips learned their own grammar, not touching, not quite, hovering, passing a jar, sharing a pen that paused an extra breath on surrender. The skin thrilled at proximity, not the crash of contact, like standing at the edge of the sea and letting the tide choose how far it would reach. Each near touch left an imprint that echoed for hours, a quiet hum in the blood. Even distance became charged. Two people in the same room, but at opposite ends, felt closer than crowded strangers pressed shoulder to shoulder. Space understood which bodies it existed for. The building participated. Doors softened their creak. The corridor carried the scent of something warm from a nearby kitchen right, when hunger and longing overlapped into an ache that was sweet and solvable. The stairwell caught two sets of footsteps and learned the rhythm of companionship. On the roof, wind tangled hair and ideas, brushed cheeks and nerves, and turned stray strands into private fireworks. The sky stretched fat with light or bruised with clouds, willing to be witness no matter the weather. The city roared its distances, but the roof made a small country with its own border, a shared railing and two hands resting close, not touching, not needing to yet. The hours developed secret pockets, mornings that offered the excuse of a forgotten umbrella, afternoons when a package arrived just in time to share the receiving, evenings where the same playlist bled softly through a wall and harmonized with a heartbeat a few feet away. There were notes slipped beneath the ordinary, a grocery list with an extra item added in loopy letters, strawberries, the good kind, a paper bookmark tucked into a borrowed book at the page where a sentence landed like a hand on the cheek. Reading that sentence aloud turned into a ritual across distance. One voice here, one voice there, walls listening like benevolent elders. Every glance grew braver. It started in the eyes, yes, but dared to travel. A glance learned the contour of a cheekbone, the dip at the clavicle, the small scar at the wrist that begged for a question asked softly. It paused at the mouth not to count beauty, but to measure honesty, how a smile arrived slow and trustworthy, how it faltered when something hurt, how it steadied when anything true needed saying. A look could say, rest here. A look could say, this is safe. A look could ask, can the day's armor be shed, piece by piece without fear? Words didn't disappear, they simply waited their turn. When they came sliced thin, tender, careful, not rushing to be impressive. Made pasta, too much, help, leave the lamp on. The hallway feels kinder that way. Heard your song through the wall, it quieted the noise. These were not speeches, they were thread, and the days were a needle. Through and through and through, until two lives started to feel like one fabric crease, elegant where it needed to be, delicate where it could afford softness, stitched most tightly where the tearing had once hurt worst. The first time a storm arrived and took the courage out of the sky, the elevator paused between floors and stuttered itself into stillness. Darkness blinked on, then off, then on. The small box turned into a confession booth without a priest. Breathing made itself known. Knuckles met gently, hands finding each other without asking for permission, fingers learning how perfectly they might belong. No panic, just the bloom of relief more profound than fear. When the power returned, neither hand let go quickly. The doors slid open onto an ordinary hallway that looked, for a second, like a miracle. Friends asked what had changed. Nothing visible, nothing to photograph. The answer lived in how tea tasted warmer, even alone. How the mirror began to reflect not just a face, but a future it could trust. The body walked through days with a steadier spine, the way a dancer carries a partner's presence even backstage, even in street clothes, even when the music is somewhere else. The simplest tasks acquired an undertow of joy. Folding laundry, the mind wandered to a shared drawer. Turning off lights, the heart rehearsed the shape of footsteps approaching. Bus rides, queues, traffic, none of it shrank the glowing place inside where it could be felt. Together is real, even when apart is happening. The unspoken connection learned boundaries and kept them lovingly. No rushing toward definitions like grabbing for a life raft. Wanting didn't translate into demanding. Instead, it translated into patience with intention. Ready when the door opened, content to wait as long as the lock needed. Soft invitations stacked up like folded blankets, a thermos of cocoa on a cold night, a playlist for a sleepless one, a chair pulled closer to the window for the sunrise that might be shared. In the spaces between, desire learned how to breathe without burning. Lips would come later when the story had earned them. For now, eye contact carried tenderness like a full cup carried without spilling. Some evenings, the building dimmed itself kindly, and the city quieted just enough to hear the inaudible, the wish beneath every look, the gratitude beneath every small exchange, the vow beneath every borrowed item, returned a day later with a note and a smile. On those nights, sleep arrived like a guest who knew the house well. Dreams stitched themselves from real moments instead of fantasy, and woke hours felt more honest for it. No grand declarations were needed. The air between bodies did the speaking. The heart listened and the body answered, and time bowed its head and agreed to move a little slower. Then came the brush with limbic bravery. A doorstep lingered on longer than courtesy demands. The night held its breath. Each face studied the other, not to memorize features, but to memorize the feeling of being understood without a test. That was when the quiet became more powerful than music. No kiss, not yet. Just closeness so present it counted as a kind of touch. Fingertips hovered, the distance thinned, and the simplest sentence found its way out, barely above a whisper. "This feels like home." The reply didn't need to be spoken. It lived in the yes inside two sets of eyes. The unspoken connection did not stay unspoken forever, but it never lost its first language. Even after words found bolder paths, silence remained the favorite room in the house they were building. The world outside continued to demand stories told loudly, but the truest story kept thriving in the places where breath met breath and stillness had nothing to prove. It began with half-open doors and secret messages and eyes learning courage, an alphabet of glances turning into a lifetime's worth of meaning. Silence said yes, and everything after learned its language. Desire never checked the clock. It arrived like a dusk wind slipping under curtains, a hush that felt like permission. The room had learned the shape of two people long before lips were brave, and the air practiced patience until patience softened into heat. Every kindness laid down earlier, notes whispered through walls, glances that steadied shaking days, became tinder the evening didn't know it was collecting. Then one quiet night, silence grew warm, and the smallest touch turned into a match struck without sound. It began in close-sense that didn't ask for spectacle. Shoulders found the same cushion, knees brushed like timid messengers, fingers hovered and retreated, returned and trembled. The body, long trained to carry everything alone, recognized home in another's breath. Inhale, exhale, 2 measures, 1 rhythm. The world shrank, not from fear, but because wonder prefers small rooms. Streetlights painted slow ladders across the floor. The window hummed a minor key. The building held its breath, as if it knew that something sacred was waking without needing to be named. Hands learned honesty first. They spoke the language of careful, of are you sure, of yes answered without words. A thumb traced the soft question at the corner of a mouth. A palm mapped the architecture of a shoulder. Knuckles skimmed along the line where strength keeps tenderness company. Every contact asked and answered at once. The tremble wasn't uncertainty. It was gratitude arriving so quickly the skin needed a moment to absorb it. Heat gathered where histories once bruised, and warmth did what speeches could not revise the story the body told itself about safety. Closeness made the room tilt into a gentler orbit. The clock insisted on minutes, but time slipped into a robe and left the door ajar. Laughter fell apart quietly between kisses not yet taken, the kind of laughter that belongs to relief. Foreheads touched, eyelashes fluttered against cheeks, feather, light. Breath found the hollow beneath an ear and stayed there like a vow. Hearts took turns leading, then surrendered the beat to one another until there was no leading left, just following the most honest pull in the room. Desire grew patient and precise. No rushing, no conquering, only invitation. The body remembered storms survived and roofs repaired, then discovered a different weather, soft rain on thirsty ground, a heat that fed rather than scorched. Buttons didn't pop, they asked politely. Fabric learned the art of falling away without drama, a quiet clearing of obstacles so skin could meet skin without apology. The darkness wasn't hiding, it was shelter, a tenderness big enough to hold two histories without judging either. The mind kept catching up to what the heart already knew, that this wasn't escape, it was arrival, that tenderness could be fierce without raising its voice, that a steady hand at the nape of the neck could rewrite whole chapters, that every careful yes could mend a no carried for years, every touch carried context, lullabies learned too late, Sunday mornings missed, doorways that once felt like checkpoints. The body listened, answered, and made new doors where none had been. Even the air changed flavor. The room smelled faintly of citrus and laundry, but underneath lived something like lightning before rain, the kind of charge that makes the skin alert, not alarmed, goosebumps for all the right reasons. Breath grew audible, then musical. Words tried to arrive and thought better of it, choosing instead to ride the sound of a sigh. The day's harsh edges rounded off until only softness remained, edges that met instead of colliding. There was reverence in the slowness, in the way a hand lingered at her wrist as if grateful for the pulse, in the pause before a kiss, that sacred half-inch where futures gather themselves, in the choice to listen for a heartbeat and let it set the pace. In the way bodies asked for what they needed by leaning into what felt true. Closer here, slower there, hold this, don't let go yet. Consent turned into choreography, and choreography turned into worship, the kind that requires no altar beyond the willingness to be completely present. The city went on clattering outside, trains insisting on rails, someone arguing with midnight down on the sidewalk. But the room had redrawn its borders. The bed was a boat, the carpet a shoreline, the window a compass that kept pointing inward. Desire didn't erase the world. It made the world kinder by proving that tenderness can be louder than noise without ever having to shout. Time, generous in that way it sometimes is with lovers who have paid their taxes to loneliness, offered an extra hour. It filled itself with small discoveries, a freckle shaped like a comma on a shoulder blade, the way laughter vibrates against a collarbone, how a name can sound like a secret when spoken into skin. There were moments of near stillness when not moving felt like the deepest motion. Bodies held, breath braided, hearts catching up to what their beating meant. In those pauses, love grew roots, not dramatic roots that crack foundations, but the kind that hold soil steady during hard weather. Memory made itself new. This was not a copy of some movie scene, not a patchwork of old want. It was a handmade thing, awkward in places, exquisite in others, all of it true. The body learned the pleasure of being met exactly where it was, not where a script demanded. The tender shock of being cherished rather than rushed. The wild relief of trusting that nothing would be taken that wasn't offered, and everything offered would be received as the gift it was. Later, limbs rested in a tangle that felt like a treaty. No winners or losers, just a shared country with its own quiet laws. Drink water, stay soft, keep laughing, tell the truth with hands when the mouth is tired. The ceiling carried slow, moving shadows. A breeze teased the curtain into a small dance. Fingers traced idle shapes on a back, circles, lines, a map that led nowhere except here. The heat in the room cooled to something sustainable, like embers that know how to keep a home warm through long winters. In that afterglow, clarity sharpened. The body understood that desire had never been the whole story. It was a door. Behind it lived all the unspectacular miracles that make love durable. The willingness to make space for old ghosts without inviting them to move back in. The courage to say not tonight without fear of losing tomorrow. The joy of learning each other's languages and inventing a new one between. The fire behind the curtains hadn't burned anything down. It had illuminated what was already being built. The careful scaffolding of trust. The beams of humor and patience. The windows of listening opened wide. When sleep finally came, it did not pull bodies apart. It draped them in the same dream, one that looked suspiciously like morning, and morning arrived with proof that nothing sacred had evaporated with the dark. Coffee tasted like a promise. Sunlight touched skin and found it still glowing. The mirror caught two softened faces and recognized them. Even the hallway seemed to nod, a coquins, spiritor proud of how far the story had walked since whispers through walls. Desire had grown like a flame starved of air, finally meeting a window flung open. But the window did not slam shut. It stayed open. The room learned to breathe that way, with love moving in and out like weather, always returning, never needing to be chased. And the body's grateful students learned it too, because closeness chose tenderness over hurry, the fire taught warmth instead of scorch, and love answered every heartbeat in the dark with yes. It began quietly, as most permanent things do. What was meant to be comfort, a shoulder offered in a moment of fatigue, turned itself into something that rewrote the definition of belonging. At first, there was nothing spectacular to name. The connection grew in the small pauses between conversations, in the warmth that lingered even after the goodbyes were spoken. It didn't announce itself as love, it disguised itself as understanding, a steady pulse of calm that made chaos make sense again. There had been weariness before this, the kind that sits in bones, not easily soothed by rest. The heart had learned to be cautious, to hold itself like glass, yet something about that presence, steady, patient, unhurried, made the cracks visible without making them shameful. Words were not required. Sometimes all it took was a glance across a crowded room, a voice saying the simplest thing, and the air changed temperature. The walls softened. The soul, long exiled from tenderness, started walking back home. Comfort became habit. The sound of laughter returned like a forgotten song. Mornings carried a new weight, one of anticipation instead of dread. Even silence began to speak, full sentences shaped out of breath and proximity. It was not passion that struck first, but safety, a rare kind that didn't demand explanation. Hands that didn't ask for anything still managed to give everything. The past, once sharp, pedged and heavy, began to dissolve in the gentle repetition of kindness. But love, real love, never stays still. It evolves, deepens, tests the soil it grows in. What had been comfort became fire, not the reckless kind that burns, but the slow, soul-fed kind that warms every dark corner. The first time hearts collided instead of merely leaning toward each other, the world stopped pretending to be large. Every heartbeat felt amplified, like a rhythm meant for two. Eyes met, and in that gaze lived 1,000 unspoken promises. To stay, to listen, to fight gently, to heal what could be healed and love what couldn't. Old scars protested at first. They remembered pain too well. But healing isn't forgetting. It's letting someone trace those scars without fear of reopening them. Fingers learned the geography of old wounds and treated them like constellations instead of damage. There was reverence in every touch, not ownership, and in that reverence something sacred was born. Rust without demand, intimacy without performance. Some nights felt like walking barefoot through memories, tender but necessary. The body remembered betrayal, the heart remembered silence, but the present offered warmth that neither past nor future could interrupt. Love here was not a rescue, it was recognition. A mirror held up, not to show perfection, but truth. Two imperfect souls choosing to see beauty anyway. Every flaw became a verse in the same song, every doubt a note that only made the harmony deeper. There were arguments too, of course. True connection invites friction, but even the storms felt different, less about winning, more about finding clarity. Words might clash, but the aftermath always returned to stillness. The quiet after anger wasn't emptiness, it was grace. Apologies came easy, forgiveness even easier, because underneath every disagreement pulsed the same unshakable truth. Losing each other was not an option. The seasons changed around them. Familiar streets took on new color, not because the city changed, but because love makes even old places shine differently. Coffee tasted softer. Rain didn't feel lonely. Even absence became bearable because distance was just another way of remembering what mattered. Letters, texts, small reminders, all simple, all sacred. A love that didn't demand drama, only devotion. Over time, the connection deepened beyond the visible. It seeped into habits, into thoughts, into breath itself. The sound of a laugh became a compass. The smell of a shirt carried safety. A single word from the right voice could steady an entire day. Love like that doesn't stay confined to moments. It expands until it becomes part of who one is. It reshapes the heart, teaches it new rhythms, makes it fluent in tenderness. And yes, it created new scars. Love always does, even when it's kind. Vulnerability leaves marks. The fear of loss, the ache of misunderstanding, the sharp edge of longing. They all carve their own shapes into memory. But these were the beautiful kind of scars, the ones that prove a heart has lived fully, that it has dared to love past logic. The pain didn't cancel the love, it completed it, because the risk of breaking is what gives meaning to holding on. Years might pass and the details may blur, the exact shade of a morning, the words said on that first real night, but the feeling remains, that pulse in the chest, that awareness that someone once saw everything, every strength, every weakness, and stayed. That is the mark love leaves when it changes everything. It's not visible on the skin, but it lives beneath it, humming softly like a heartbeat remembered. Some loves fade into nostalgia, others become lessons. But this one became foundation. It redefined forever, not as endless time, but as unending impact. No matter where life carried the two souls after, no matter what came or didn't come, something fundamental had been rewritten. Once love has shown the soul what it means to be fully seen, there's no returning to blindness. And so, what began as comfort grew into a force that bent time, softened grief, and retaught joy. It healed what was broken and broke what had hardened. It made everything before it feel like preparation and everything after it feel like echo. It was not perfect. It was real. It was the kind of love that carved its initials into existence itself, quiet and eternal. And even now, when the world moves on and memory wears thin, the heart still beats to that rhythm, the love that changed everything. If this story stirred something inside you, if it made you remember, ache, or believe again, then stay close. Every week, a new heartbeat, a new confession, another piece of love that dares to be real. So hit like, share this moment with someone who still believes in forever, and subscribe to keep love alive one story at a time. Because here, love doesn't end when the story fades. It just changes shape and waits for you in the next one. Until then, keep your heart open, your walls thin, and your soul ready to recognize the voice that could change everything. This is true love story with deep love, and the next chapter is already waiting for you.